You're listening to Random Fit with hosts Wendy Batts and Ken Miller, winner of a Gold Markham Award for Digital Media.
Welcome to this episode of Random Fit, everybody. I'm your host, co-host Ken Miller with Miss Wendy Batts. Wendy, how you doing?
You can be the host. I'll just be I'll just be here listening to you if you want.
I'll be the Jay Leno. Hey, Jay Leno didn't have a co-host, did he? It was
Johnny Carson.
Johnny Carson and
Ed McMahon.
Ed McMahon. I'd say Jim McMahon.
I think we're saying our age, by the way. People probably don't even know Johnny Carson. And just as something out of the complete ordinary, had nothing to do with our opening. My son comes in and he's like, "Here's Johnny." And I'm like, "What?" And this happened literally last night before he went to bed, brushing his teeth. I'm like, "Where did you hear that?" And he's like, "I don't know. I thought it was funny. Someone said it on the bus." And I'm like, there was actually a talk show host that was his opening.
There you go. Maybe that's our new opening.
See, it was good to be.
Here's Wendy.
Here we are, guys. Welcome to Random Fit.
All right, so today, Wendy, you're going to enlighten me because I know this is one of those things you and your family like to go to, but we're talking about motorsports, right? Motorsport conditioning, training for those guys who have to be behind the wheel or the handlebars, really. So, Wendy, I'm really looking forward to what you have to say about this because this, again, you talk about NASCAR and you go to the events and I don't. So this is going to be a fun one.
I know. Well, everyone assumes because I'm from Nashville that I grew up watching NASCAR, knowing everything there is to know about F1 cars and motorbikes and motocross and all the different events. But it wasn't until I had my son that I became a big monster truck fan because he was a monster truck fan. So any monster truck that was out there, we owned. And then every time Monster Jam came to Atlanta or the surrounding area, multiple times a year, we would go because it would just make his face light up. And, we're actually going to be talking more about like NASCAR and the different drivers, not necessarily monster trucks, but then how it actually translates now into NASCAR in my family there was a driver. His name was Kevin Harvick, who is now our number one fan, or we're number one fans of his because of my son. He's retiring this year, but a couple years ago, he actually transformed his NASCAR into Gravedigger, which was my son's favorite truck. And so Gravedigger NASCAR, Kevin Harvick, drove that car one time on the Nashville track. And so they actually had Gravedigger monster truck and his car side by side in Nashville. And my son just became all about NASCAR. And so we do watch NASCAR every Sunday. And, Ken and you and I were talking about how these drivers have to be in incredible shape. And we started talking about just what they have to go through when they're in the car. And that kind of took us down a rabbit hole on, wait, what do they do? And they do have, just like they have housewives of whatever, they do have the same type of thing about the life of NASCAR drivers. And we watched that show and they do show them working out multiple times a day or hours on end because of their conditioning in order to get behind the wheel. And that's actually what we're talking about. So when we say motorsports conditioning, we're talking about the conditioning and the health of these drivers and what they have to go through in order to race on the big races over the weekends.
Yeah, and I think one of the stats that when we were looking this up, it's like, okay, well, they are athletes; they have to support all the forces that go into their body. So if they're an F1 racer, but turns left, turns right, varying degrees of turns. But when you're talking about NASCAR, you have that centripetal force just on you the whole time. Basically, you have your straightaways, but then you have your curves. But the one thing that got me, Wendy, was the fact that they show that their heart rate can get up to 170, 180 beats per minute and be there for a couple hours when they're racing. So that alone makes them an athlete. And I know that there are people that'll say, hey, well, you're just sitting there, you're steering the wheel. How much energy and effort does it take to push on a pedal and steer that wheel? But But when you're talking about someone having to press on the pedal and on the brakes, 175 pounds of pressure up to, right? But also just the fact that you have to keep your heart rate up. And if you're into using heart rate as a training data point, then I mean, how many sports are there to where someone's going to have their heart rate elevated for that amount of time, that high for that amount of time? I know for myself, just to get my heart rate up to 150 is, I mean, that's about, I can keep it up there for however many minutes, right? But think hours. So the
Mhm.
amount of conditioning you need to do when you're not in the car to get your heart ready to sustain that amount of stress, and I just can't imagine what the recovery is like. But to now, as you're saying, Wendy, if you're going to get them ready to sit into a car, right, and have their heart rate up there for that amount of time, what do you got to do when you're not in the car to make it so that your heart's not going to explode, or you're going to have some kind of big stressful event on your body when it actually comes time to race?
Yeah, and I think there's when you're looking at the different owners, and so there's I won't even say all the names, but there are some that invest a lot in these drivers, as you guys know, because these cars are worth a lot of money, and they're trying to win races and win the titles of in make it to the playoffs to win the final cup or whatever, because you earn what they call stage points and points during each and every race. And so, before we even go back into what we were listening or what we're really diving deep into about the drivers, each one of their drivers has to spend at least 4 hours in the gym doing a mix of resistance training, cardio, and trying to keep their heart rate elevated, because as we've talked about, you get what you train for. So therefore they are trying to take them above and beyond. So they really focus a lot on nutrition. They're focusing a lot on their rest. And, the physical conditioning of that particular driver is important, because if not, I mean, think about this, guys. They can easily become confused and disoriented because of the G forces at driving 200 miles an hour. They're very confined into how much spacing they have to try to maneuver around cars to get what they call clean air, which means to get that car in the very front and have them go around. And so if they have to be able to withstand, and I was like, G forces, really? But yeah. So when they're taking these turns and people are trying to like push them out of the way, or you're trying to go bumper to bumper, so therefore you're actually getting kind of dragged behind them. So therefore you're able to come out and I don't know if you guys have ever seen Days of Thunder, but if not, when they're riding bumper to bumper, the second car actually doesn't have to work as hard as the front car. And then at the very end, the second car can pull out, they have more gas, and then that's how they win. And so when you're thinking about that too, I was looking into the car, and they train oftentimes even in gyms with no air conditioning, because their cars are not allowed to have air conditioning. They're not listening to music. They're having to listen to the headphones on, is there a wreck on turn 3, or what's going on with this car, or so-and-so blew a tire, be careful because this is in the road. They're having to really concentrate as they're driving and trying to get ahead. So, they were saying that it can get up to, I've got to look to exactly where it was, but I think it was like over 120 degrees in the actual cockpit. And then on the actual pavement is an additional 150 to 200 degrees above that. So they're in this suit, fireproof suit, and they have to have oxygen, in their helmets, as well as water or something to keep them hydrated, because it's so hot that they were saying on average, how about this? On average, each of the drivers in NASCAR lose about 10 pounds of water weight just in one race. So they're having to stay hydrated throughout in order to keep themselves able to focus and be in that extreme heat for anywhere from 2 to 4 hours, depending on how long that race may last.
And that is a lot. That's a lot of water weight to lose, because when I was still a strength coach, and it was, it'd be August, September, and for conditioning, and if it's hot outside, we would weigh the football players before they went out onto the field. And then we would weigh them when they got off the field to make sure that they were drinking enough water throughout practice. So for anybody that lost a good amount, we'd have guys that would lose, like what you're talking about, Wendy. a lot of water, but not 10 pounds worth. Well, some of the bigger guys, so some of the guys that were 330, 340 pounds, but drivers don't weigh that much. So for them, yeah, I know, right? So for them to lose 10 pounds versus a 340 pounder that loses 10 pounds of water weight, right? They'll suck it up when they have a chance, and it's a smaller percentage of their body weight. So when you put that into perspective of the amount of hydration that that they need to pay attention to, because when we talk about hydration and we talk about dehydration, what you're saying, Wendy, is with the cognitive effect. You have to think, and you have to have fast reflexes, right? You have to have the reflexes to change gears, steer, like you're saying, you're going for that clear air, and you have to make millisecond decisions. So dehydration does affect all that, and that, I think, just from a cognitive standpoint, that's what makes a lot of these drivers, actually really, really elite athletes when it comes to the mental, the psychological demands of that sport.
Yeah. And I think it's also, I didn't even do it justice because I was looking at my notes. I'm like, where was it? Where was it? It's actually when the races begin. So think about like an early race would be like the Daytona 500. That's like an early, like spring, summer type race. That's when those temperatures in the cockpit itself, it was 120 to 130 degrees. And then by mid to late summer, it can get up to 160 degrees. And guys, these races have been there. Trust me, they are not short. So, and if you decide to take a little, just know that they love the start your engines. They like 1 or 2 laps, and then there's 400 of them. And by lap 12, they're like, is it almost over? But you have to stay for the burnout, because that's also what it's all about. So, it's hot just being a spectator, in these stands, and we have the ability to go and get, anything that we want to eat or drink or hang out, along celebrating, whatever it is that's going on throughout the race. These guys are stuck in a very small car. They're really having to concentrate in those extreme temperatures. That puts a lot on us. You think about when you're out hiking, if you're not hydrated very well, how easily somebody can get dehydrated and what that does to someone. Now, again, these are athletes that train this way, but, I think when you think about the G-forces and all the amount of pressure that has to go onto your body and the thought process and that's one thing. But, they mandate that you have to be at least 140 pounds in order to drive a NASCAR. And if you don't make up that, the car itself has to be 3,300 pounds. And so if there is the weight of the driver is concerned. So every driver has to weigh 140 pounds. And for every 10-pound increment below 180 pounds for the driver, so 140 to 180, you have to add an additional 10 pounds to the car to equal that exact 3,300 pounds. So therefore it's equal. So I was like, well, what if one driver weighs 200 pounds and you have someone that's 140 pounds? There's going to be a big difference. The car itself has to weigh the same. So whatever those drivers equal out to, they have to add more and more and more weight if they don't hit the 3,300 mark, which I found very interesting because I didn't know how that worked.
So they got to weigh the car and the person before.
Well, they weigh the car with the person in it, but they can't weigh below 140 pounds. If so, they can't be a NASCAR driver. So, think about this. If I'm a personal trainer and I'm working with someone and they are on the lower end of the 140 or 150 range, I have to be careful because I know too, again, if they start losing weight, in the car because they're sweating it out, that's totally different, but they all have to start weighing the same, meaning the cars itself with the driver inside. So they continuously add more and more weight to the car till it evens it out. Now, if you have something that's like a person that's 200 pounds driving, they have to make sure that the car, they may have to take certain things off, even though there are particular parts that have to be included in the car, obviously, to make it work and to make it safe. So, you have that to think about. But then if you've ever watched it, obviously these drivers wear helmets, and then they're also in a very protected position in their neck and head, because when they do get in wrecks, they want to try to minimize the impact to their head. So think about that as well. They're kind of locked into this one position for safety. So they have to have really good peripheral vision. They have to be able to have really good reflexes. They're also wearing these helmets and these suits. So, making sure that you've got, good alignment within your neck is going to be extremely important throughout your spine. Because again, drivers, just like you guys know, if you take a drive, 200 or 300 miles and you get out of the car, your knees hurt, your back hurts, your shoulders hurt. Well, these guys are driving at extreme miles per hour. They're getting all these forces within their body. So making sure that they really do have strong core, they're really working on their shoulders as well as their mid to lower back and their core is extremely important in order to maintain the longevity of their careers.
Yeah, and again, it is one of those things as well. Again, as in when we talked about the amount of G forces on your body. So when you talk about 6.5 Gs, just think again, one grab is your weight being pulled down to earth, but now imagine that weight going to your what is it to your right, Wendy? Right. So when you're going around the
Yeah,
NASCAR,
you're turning left and your body is wanting to shift. It depends. If you're turning left, your body's going to want to shift in that direction. But then think about too, if you're getting hit, it's going to be the opposing direction. So, and it's the constant. Think about this. We talk about your body being a NASCAR, and after a race, you have to rebuild it just like you do after a season with some of these elite athletes. I mean, think about your body as a driver always getting that same force on one side.
right. So what we are talking about here on Random Fit with both Wendy Batts and I, Ken Miller, talking about motorsports conditioning. So yeah, so if I've got all that force going one side, you've got to have that equal and opposite strength to the other side. Otherwise, I can imagine that your head, between your head, your shoulders, everything is just completely going to one side. It's just kind of like how, well, not kind of like, but when you think about horse racing, when we talk about horse racing here in the U.S., they always go counterclockwise, but I think in in the UK they go counterclockwise, right? So you've got a little different balance in the horses there. So
I didn't know that. So maybe we should do a podcast on that. I'm like, I always know them to go the same direction as a NASCAR, but okay.
yeah. Well, my point there being like, well, that was just a random thought. Well, we are on Random
Well,
Fit.
we are on Random Fit.
So with all that force having you go one way, I mean, I can't imagine, you've got that helmet, right? And then your head just kind of, and I'm sure it's not just a smooth ride like you're going like a freshly paved, highway, but you got the bumps and turns and steering around other cars, but the jarring that on your neck, now you add 6.5 Gs that your head has to control with the weight of the helmet. I mean, that's amazing to me that the amount of neck strength that these guys need, not to mention, again, if you're going one direction and you have to steer the other, so your arms have to go, in another direction or straighten out or whatever they have to do with that force coming through the body. So that's just a lot of trunk stability, a lot of shoulder stability, a lot of neck stability. So in looking at what they do for conditioning, so not only the heart rate situation where you have to challenge them enough that their heart rate gets up there, but also the level of stability training, right? Just being able to hold yourself in space, your postural control, postural endurance. And traditionally, when you're doing these postural stability exercises, those aren't what you would really consider to be high cardio demand or intensive exercises either. So that's got to be another segment of what you would do for conditioning. But then again, if you're training hours on end multiple times a day just to work on the conditioning, I'm sure core strength or actually core stability on top of core strength has got to take up a significant amount of time when it comes to how they parcel out, okay, how are we going to challenge this driver's body so that they can be strong enough to drive a car. So being able to get them into the weight room, doing some kind of core work, well, first of all, if we're talking about the conditioning side, now you have to consider what possible overuse injuries that might come with sitting down, hip flex, knee flexed, arms raised, right? Which has got to be an endurance feat in itself, where you're having to try to steer, right, through the however many hours that they're going to be racing. But I mean, the amount of hip flexor work to be seated and trying to kind of hold yourself away from being pulled over to one side of the car. I don't know. I just got to see what their workout looks like and try it for once.
I think if you watch the reality show, you're going to see that there's not a lot of differences in kind of how we would train using the NASM OPT model. And what I mean by that is, we really work on looking at where the overactivity is. They do reassessments. They are doing, muscle activation exercises, because if you are in a seated position, you guys know that your glutes are going to, end up not being as strong as they should be. That can impact your lower back. I know they were saying, looking at some of the different trainers that were interviewed that do work with this particular population in sport, they were saying what they have to do to really, get the shoulders to withstand that time under tension. And so what they do to help that, but then also not do repetitive movements that are going to lead to issues long-term. You find that stuff fascinating, but, if you guys look at these different drivers, you have to think about a NASCAR driver is completely different than like a rally car driver. And so a NASCAR driver, for example, will go and they'll try to get their pole, like they try to win the pole on Saturday, which means they do a Saturday race. So they may go in a couple of days early and practice the course. And then after that, they race to find out their positioning for the start for Sunday's race. So there's a few different days that they have to be driving in those conditions, but it's, again, very short period of time. And then, you take that in consideration of what you've got to do for that driver. But look at a motocross individual. These guys are very, what they call anterior dominant, meaning that the front of their body is going to be stronger, and because of how they have to lean on the bike. And so therefore the front of them are very strong in comparison. So as a trainer, to kind of counteract that, we would really focus on a lot of backside, dominant type things, but then also making sure they have the flexibility. So if you guys have ever seen, a motorcycle race, you're going to see what they have to do with their leg towards the turn. They have to have really good flexibility in that turn leg in order to make the turn so the bike doesn't flip, and they can also, obviously win the race. So, but they ride for about 30 minutes, 3 times a day. So again, a total of 130 minutes on the bike, but they get breaks in between. If you look at a rally car driver, you're driving 6 to 7 hours, 6 or 7 days a week. And so, again, different types of training for these types of individuals. Again, there is what is the temperature, what type of terrain is it, because all of it does play a factor. And some of these guys actually drive in different races with different cars. And, like I said, I know this is totally something completely different. But when I started kind of diving deeper and thinking about what is it that I enjoy doing with my family, obviously NASCAR is a big one, only because of what I said in the beginning of this show. But I found it really fascinating to learn more about, what these drivers endure in the actual car, but then also what they have to do to maintain, their cognitive ability, but then also physically each and every week.
Yeah, I think, Wendy, if you take the grand, the kind of like take the wide lens view of when it comes to training for any sport, there's what we see on TV, right? So if you're watching NASCAR on TV, and for me, if it's Sunday and I'm flipping through the channels, I see NASCAR on one channel and I'll see golf on another channel. Yeah, 9 times out of 10, I'll pick golf. But but one of the things that you don't appreciate until you have a chance to work with these athletes is how much time they spend conditioning and training for their sport. So having worked in collegiate sports, and I know you've worked in professional sports as well, Wendy, there's a lot that goes on before they actually hit the field or the track or the pitch, whatever it may be. So listening to you and researching what we researched on, okay, well, what does it take for somebody in that environment on the track, behind a wheel, on 4 wheels or 2 wheels? What does it take for them to be great at what they do, to be a leader, to be a winner in what they do? And it's just amazing what they put their bodies through. And I think for those of us that aren't in it every day, it's just, it's like, man, these guys are specimens at all levels of being an athlete. So thanks, Wendy, for sharing your insight here on NASCAR.
I know, right?
Training for NASCAR.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, when I was looking up other exercises and watching videos, it's squat jumps, it's squats, it's they do rope climbing. And I was like, oh, is that so when they win and they get their checkered flag, they can climb the stands and high five
Yeah.
and then get their flag so they can get ready for their burnout. But there's a lot that goes through it. I mean, anybody that is that has been doing some type of sport, they know what it is to have really good reflexes and being able to see peripherally what's going on around them in order to be the best in their sport. Well, there's training for that. There's a training for a lot of different things. And to your point, this was something that was different. But when someone's like, oh, they're just a driver, I'm like, well, you know what? Their physique is almost all the same. So there's got to be more behind. They're just a driver. Guys, these are top athletes as well, because they can probably withstand more than many of us can in order just to be able to put a show on each and every week.
Yeah, and when you think they have to keep their heart rate up, kind of, for the intensity and the duration of almost the same as a marathoner.
A top marathon runner is what I read. Yeah.
Yeah. You are an athlete. So
Yeah.
So again, Wendy, thanks for your insight and helping me better understand what it takes to be a good driver. I need help with that anyway, just on city streets.
I was going to say so many different things, but I'm totally not. So thanks for joining.
I say you should see the curb rash on my on my wheels. All right, so for everybody, thank you so much for listening to us on this episode of Random Fit, where we talked about motorsports conditioning. On behalf of both Wendy Batts and I, Ken Miller, thank you for taking the time out and listening to what we had to talk about on today's episode. So for future topics on Random Fit, please like, follow, subscribe, comment, share, and more importantly, comment and let us know what you want to listen to, and we'll get that on there for you. So until next time, everybody, take care and be well.